Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see people from across the area. So we got people from Kern and Antelope Valley, Sacramento, Ohlone, San Diego, West Valley. Welcome, welcome, everybody. College of the Desert, thank you. Welcome. It looks to be 8:30, so we're going to get started. Welcome everybody again to the presentation today on culturally responsive CTE curriculum. My name is Stephanie Curry, and I'm a member of the Academic Center for California Community Colleges. I'm a North representative there. My day job, I'm a librarian at Reedley College, which we have a lot of CTE programs there. And I did teach in a CTE program for about 10 years for library technology. So I'm really excited to be here today and share with you. I want to also have our co-presenter introduce himself, Dr. Sims.
Just realized I'm on mute. I'm Jeremiah Sims. I'm the Director of Equity for the College of San Mateo. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see your shining faces here this morning. And I have 5 boys, so if you hear some noise in the background, everything's okay. You just have to trust me on that. 5 boys make a lot of noise.
Thank you. All right. So during this presentation, we would love it if you had questions. If you'd like to ask those, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go through. If you want to actually make your question in person, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute. We'll call on you to unmute so we can ask your questions and answer your questions at the same time. All right. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and we'll get started. All right. So welcome everybody. On the agenda today, you probably saw that it was supposed to be Mayra Cruz, was supposed to be the co-presenter today. Unfortunately, she had a bereavement in the family and was not able to attend. So I'm going to do my best to cover for her as we go through. But today we really want to talk about something that's really an important topic in our institutions right now, which was this culturally responsive CTE curriculum and how important this is for our students. So today we're going to learn specific methods and ideas to integrate culturally responsive and appropriate ideas into our existing curriculum. Like we all have classes that we have. How can we use the information we have in the self-reflection about equity and make our classes the best classes we can for our students? All right. So before we get started, I want to take just a moment to have us kind of reflect. When we're talking about culturally responsive curriculum, it does mean a lot of change. Right? And sometimes change is a little scary, but we're doing it because our students need this. And it's because mostly our system of education was not designed for all of our students, right? Our system of education was designed long ago, mostly for privileged white males, right? That's what our systems were set up for. And although we've made some adjustments in our systems, the foundation of our system is that. And so it was built to benefit those groups. So how can we then change their systems so that it benefits all of our students? And so I just want us to take that moment to think about fundamentally changing structures, because that's really what we're focusing on. Who does it benefit? Whom does it harm? And what are we doing in our work towards anti-racism? And it have to be intentional in doing that. So we're asking you to, as our wonderful Dr. Regina Sternbeck-Stroud says, to decide to enter the space and have this conversation as part of our processes. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sims.
All right, so we're going to play a game. And I know that I did this with some community college students the other day, and they are, I don't know what generation, Gen Zers maybe. So they had actually played the game of life on a board game. Many of us have. So think back to the game of life. And so we're going to have a conversation about the choices that some people already made, a different set of possibilities with regard to this game. And I'll talk a little bit more about my background. Can you go to the next slide, please, Stephanie? All right, so here are the decisions that you have to make. So you need some kind of note-taking apparatus. It can be your computer or it can be paper. And also, if you are if you're not currently speaking, could you please make sure that you're muted? I can hear somebody pouring something. Sounds like coffee. So if you're able, please mute. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to start with $100. So if you would be so kind, jot that down somewhere. And these are the decisions that you need to make, right? Obviously, many of you have already made these decisions, most of you. But just for the sake of this conversation, think back. So you have $100. You can decide whether or not you want to purchase a college degree. If you purchase a 4-year degree, it costs 40 of those $100, but the benefit is $60. Okay, so it's plus 20. If you decide to get a graduate degree or professional degree, it costs $55, but the benefit is $80, right? So it's plus 25. So then you have to determine your housing, right? Because, we're thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? There are certain things that need to be taken care of, right? So housing. So if you just want to rent, right? We know for those of us who are in the Bay Area and other places where rent is exorbitant, these are real considerations, right? So if you were going to have a substandard rental, it costs $25 out of your $100. But I'm going to tell you right off the top, right? What most realtors wouldn't tell you, that this is a high crime area. There's low employment opportunities. There are environmental toxins. It's in a food desert. The schools are under-resourced if you have children, and there's limited access to Wi-Fi. Now, if you want to pay more, right, significantly more, you pay $40. You can get a good rental.
Yeah. Okay, I review everybody. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Dr. Smith, I had to mute everybody. So if you unmute again real quick.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Housing, for a good rental, it costs significantly more, right? Not quite twice as much, but we're moving in that direction. But for that money, you get safe. It's a safe neighborhood. There's access to fresh food. There are jobs close by that pay a living wage, well-resourced schools, and then you have several Wi-Fi options. Or you can purchase a house. Now, that's the most expensive option. And we know it's not necessarily reality for everyone, especially here in the Bay Area. But in this particular game, you can purchase a house. It costs $50, but it's plus 20. You earn $70, right? So you can own your home and your property appreciates. There are other choices. And so I'll go through these a little bit more quickly now, right? Your food option for $10 out of your budget, you can purchase. And so I'm sorry, I didn't say this. The object of the game is to have some savings at the end, right? You don't want to spend until you have nothing left. In a capitalist economy, right, that's incredibly difficult to do. Okay, so if you purchase unhealthy food, $10, you get processed foods, high sugar content, corn syrup and dyes, little to no access to fresh fruits and vegetables, many fast food options and corner stores, GMO foods, diets associated with diseases like diabetes and cancer. If you want to pay more, it's twice as much, but you can get convenient access to grocery stores with fresh food, organic, non-GMO options, access to a variety of restaurants, right? So you're just marking your credits and debits. You're trying to balance your checkbook at this point. You have to have health insurance. If you want to pay $10 for health insurance, it covers the bare minimum. There are high copays, inadequate for any major needs or ongoing health issues, and little to no choice of doctor or hospital. If you want to pay more, if you're willing to pay more, you get adequate coverage and options for care and a choice of doctors. And then there's this kind of self-care. You need to be able, Zoom makes it a little bit different. You only have to get top dressed now. You can wear shorts on the bottom if you want. But think about a time where we were actually in person, right? So you can get a discount wardrobe, drugstore beauty and hygiene products for $5. If you're willing to pay twice as much, you get wardrobe options, also haircuts, gym memberships or classes, skin, nails, beauty, hygiene product options, right? You have more options, but it costs more. For your social recreation, it's $10 across the board, right? For childcare, if you have children, right? If you have children, you can pretend that you don't. If you don't, you can pretend that you do for the sake of the game, right? Cost for 1 to 3 children, double for more than 3 children. So $10 for a babysitter, but if you want to send your child to a Montessori pre-K, it's $20 for up to 3 children. And then your car plus your auto insurance. You want a working vehicle, sometimes unreliable and needs work, and limited liability coverage or collision coverage. That's $10. If you want a good looking and dependable car, full coverage with the option to lease, that's $20. So now you just go through with the decisions you make. And in the chat, let me know how much. If you have money left, let me know how much you have. You just type your number in the chat. Hopefully folks have some money left. Okay, Victoria is winning. All right.
Yeah.
All right, everybody keep chatting. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to go to the next screen. So now we're going to talk about some confounding variables. Can you go to the next slide for me,
Yep.
Stephanie? Thank you. So if your sex assigned at birth is woman, then you have to automatically minus $20 from what you have, because women get paid on average 80 cents on the dollar for what men earn. If you're a woman of color, it's actually you have to minus 35, because women of color, BIPOC women get 65 cents on the dollar for the same job vis-a-vis equally qualified men. If you are a European American male, i.e. white male, you're plus $20. If you are an Asian male, not Southeast Asian, but if you're an Asian male, then you plus $10. Right? If you have pre-existing health issues, then you have to minus $10. If you are differently able, you minus $30. If you are first in your family to go to college, if you were the first in your family to go to college, you minus $15. If you have faced housing insecurities, you've been transitory, you've been couch surfing, whatever the case may be, living with family, and it was not, your goal was not to live that way, then you minus $10. If you have faced homelessness, if you have been unhoused, you minus $10. And if you are formerly justice impacted, meaning you've been part of the carceral system or even the foster care system, then you minus $15. And so just so you know, I actually researched all these things, and these percentages are not one-to-one, but they're fairly accurate. So now, do people have money left now? So what happened here, right? What happened to our whole, I thought if you just work hard, then the world opens up for you, right? We had this whole kind of mythology connected to Horatio Alger, right? If you could pull yourself up by your bootstraps, then everything is possible for you in this country. But we know that that's not the case. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said something that's incredibly profound. Many things are incredibly profound. But he said the cruelest thing that you can say to someone in poverty, right, to a bootless man, is that all he has to do is pull himself up by his bootstraps. And so there goes our myth of meritocracy. Victoria, feel free to borrow it. You're doing great if you still have $5 left. All right, so I'm going to go next slide, please. And so this is a quote from James Baldwin. I think that it is germane to the exercise that we just did. And I talked to you, so I've done this with community college students, and one of the things that I have to do with them is lift them back up, because there's a level of kind of sadness that this game invokes, because they're like, well, you know, no matter what I do, there are things outside of my control that determine the life that I live. And my pushback for them is that that is not actually the case, right? We've seen so many changes. We've seen so many things happen towards justice. And a lot of this is actually catalyzed by students. And so that's the conversation that I have with them. And I want you all to be encouraged. You all have lived more life than the students that I work with typically. And just know that these things can change. And that's why we're having these conversations. So this is a quote from James Baldwin. If one really wishes to know how justice is administered in a country, one does not question the policemen, the lawyers, the judges, or the protected members of the middle class. One goes to the unprotected, those precisely who need the law's protection the most, and listens to their testimony. And so again, that exercise, we spent a lot of time on that exercise. We won't for the sake of this conversation, right? It blows up that whole myth of meritocracy, right? So what we need to understand is that for a long time in community college spaces, we talked about the achievement gap and how the achievement gap was the kind of was the crux of our work as community college practitioners. But the achievement gap is problematic because it foists the locus of failure onto the shoulders of the students, and it fails to acknowledge the role that we play as an institution, right? So meritocracy the idea of meritocracy necessitates uh, uh, a kind of concept of rugged individualism and that perseverance and dogged determination, right? And all these things are incredibly problematic when you don't take into account the things that are outside of the control of the students that we serve. Next slide, please. Were you going to read this? You want me to read it? I can. All right. So this is rostrum. I don't know that much about it. I'm relatively new to it. Myra put this on here.
I could do that.
Yeah,
So thank you. We actually, as the AS Academic Center for California Community Colleges, have really taken the idea that we really need to spend a lot of time discussing anti-racism and specifically anti-Blackness. And so I just want to highlight this amazing Senate rostrum that we did last summer in the wake of all the social reckonings that came out, where we asked our faculty, our Black faculty in our system to write about their experiences in the community college system as educators, but also as former students as part of the process. And so these are really strong personal narratives from our system partners and our BIPOC faculty, and specifically our Black faculty. And so it's a great opportunity to really listen to our colleagues about what is happening in our system, the discrimination, the microaggressions that they're still facing, and really hear their voices as part of the process. And so I did put a link to the actual full rostrum article, the full rostrum publication with all of these voices in there. And this is a lot about this idea of decolonization, and that as part of the process is that in academia, what we learn about is white European history and literature. I mean, that's the fact of the truth is it. And our students, and especially our Black faculty and our Black students, don't see themselves in that curriculum. And it's so important that we change that dynamic and make sure that everybody sees themselves in our curriculum, because that's the reason why we do our curriculum, is so the students can get the experience and understand and be part of the process. So I would encourage you to read through this. It's really an amazing outpouring of what our Black faculty are actually feeling during this time period. And so I take the time to read it as you go forward. All right.
All right. Okay, so then you're going to respond to this in the chat too. And so please, if you feel comfortable doing so. So this is just a question that I want to pose. Of these four kind of social realities, which one came first? Which birthed which? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg argument, even though that one to me is fairly straightforward because it had to be the chicken, otherwise nothing can warm the egg. But, so we'll just stick with the numbers that are assigned to each one of the terms. So if you think that white supremacy birthed race, and race birthed racism, and racism birthed racialized capitalism, then what you would write in the chat, what you would type in the chat is 1, 4, 3, 2. So we'll leave this up. So which came first of these four things, and what is the kind of linear progression between the four? So just go ahead and type your answers in the chat. Does that make sense? You want to do the whole thing? Yeah, there you go. Like Annabella's doing. All right. All right, I'm seeing a lot of ones, some fours.
Of course, yeah.
All right. So I'll talk a little bit about this. And so I'll talk a little bit about my background. So I went to school. I'm a former community college student. I spent a long time in community college. It took me about 8 years to finally get through. When I did, I did my undergraduate work at UC Berkeley in the rhetoric department. And then I went through a program to get a master's and a PhD also at UC Berkeley. And the program was Language, Literacy, Society, and Culture. My training is that of a critical race scholar. And so the conversations that I have usually adhere around that. I made the transition to administrator because I wanted to be in community college space, because I work with community college students as a graduate student. And again, myself, I'm a former community college student. And so I've written a little bit about this. Some of you probably heard of Minding the Obligation Gap We did a webinar series on that. And I have a book called Revolutionary STEM Education. I'm actually working on another book that's called Towards Liberation, Anti-Racist Growth Mindset and the Redesign of College Redesign. So I'm working on that now. So I spent a lot of time talking about these things and researching these things. And I have yet to see what I would identify in the chat as the catalyst for the three remaining kind of social realities. So for me, it's easy and it's really clear to determine which came first. Racialized capitalism birthed white supremacy. White supremacy birthed race, and racism is the progeny of race. And so I'll talk about that briefly. So what racialized capitalism, so racialized capitalism, the term racialized capitalism, which is what I'm taking up in this new book, is a tautological term or a redundant term. Capitalism in this country has been and is still currently racialized. The way that our insurance system works, the way that our credit system works, is all based on African chattel slavery. That is what birthed these institutions. In fact, the Industrial Revolution, the factories that are kind of illustrative of the Industrial Revolution, that characterized the Industrial Revolution, the factory model is based on the wombs of Black slaves, because they produced a commodity, which were slaves. The money, the generational wealth that was created in this country was created not from cotton, but from mortgaging and remortgaging and loaning out and selling human beings. At one point in our nation's history, 1/5 of all the wealth in this country was contained within the musculature, the endocrine systems, the skeletal systems of Black people. They were the first liquid commodity in this country. And so I want to be clear that capitalism has always been racialized. Capitalism birthed white supremacy because, we know our history, right, with Manifest Destiny, and folks came here ostensibly, and some, in fact, did come here for religious freedom. So in a Judeo-Christian reality, right, folks who are focused on the New Testament and have moved away from the Old Testament, right, you cannot own another human being. It's not possible. So in order to justify the accruing of capital on the backs of human beings, they have to be dehumanized. And so white supremacy was birthed from capitalism as a justification for the accrual of capital on the backs of Black and Indigenous peoples, right? And so white supremacy, right, because they had to differentiate between white, i.e. human, and Black, i.e. non-human. And so white supremacy birthed this concept of race, right? And in order to understand that whiteness was supreme, it had to have a antithesis, right? If whiteness was the thesis, then Blackness was the antithesis, right? And that's how the continuum worked. And then racism is born out of race. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple slides. Can you go to the next slide, please? All right, so this is from my book, Revolutionary STEM Education. It's important to note that these structural institutionalized bulwarks of inequity are not accidental any more than the genocidal land theft and peripheralizing of Indigenous peoples is. Rather, they are designed to ensure a material dowry while they simultaneously uphold the unholy marriage between white supremacy and perverse racialized capitalism. This material and corporeal dowry is accrued on the backs of people of color precisely because in this country, capitalism is built atop a foundation of white supremacy, which is inextricably and inescapably anti-Black. Next slide, please. This is from Minding the Obligation Gap. White supremacy is first and foremost a political orientation that works in the interest of accruing, centralizing, and hoarding both money and power. And so what I described in this book is a kind of incestuous relationship because racialized capitalism is the parent of white supremacy, but then there's somehow a marriage between the two. And that's what produces the inequities that we're all interested in fighting against in our institutions. Next slide, please. So the truth will set us free. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the lies that our educational system is founded on. Next slide, please. So this book I highly recommend. It's called Begin Again by Eddie S. Glaude Jr. And he's taking a look at the work of James Baldwin. This is one of the best books that I've read in recent memory. So in this book, he talks about the value gap. The value gap is the idea that in America, white lives have always mattered more than the lives of others. The lie is broad and powerful, and it maintains false assumptions. And I want to be clear about why this is important. If we don't begin to work towards uncovering the truth about the way that things are in our institutions, we'll never actually be able to change them. And so we're going to talk about a tool that I created called the Impact Equity Evaluation Toolkit. And what that tool is designed to do is help us uncover these lies. Because as long as our work is predicated on and built upon a foundation that is untrue, our work won't have the power that it could have. It won't reach its fullest potential until we figure out how to first do away with the lies. Next slide, please. This is a quote from Just Mercy. We have a constitution that talks about equality, liberty, and justice for all. And for decades, for centuries, we tolerated enslavement of other human beings. We tolerated abuse and violence against people. We tolerated bigotry and discrimination. I think there's a kind of smog in the air that's created by the history of slavery and lynching and segregation. And I don't think we're going to get healthy. I don't think we can be free until we address this problem. But to get there, we're going to have to be willing to tell the truth, right? And part of that exercise that we did earlier is to help us uncover the truth, right? The truth is, it's not just about how hard you work. We need to work hard. We understand that our students need to work hard. We need to encourage them to reach their fullest potential. But there are bulwarks of macro structural inequity that are designed. It's not happenstantial. It's not accidental. They are designed intentionally to limit the upward mobility of certain groups of people, because there is a value gap that not just our educational system, but even our country is founded upon. And in order to do the work, the generative, authentic work necessary, we have to identify the lies that we've been institutionalizing and using in ways that are axiomatic for decades now. Next slide, please. So we talk a little bit about equity-minded competence. So what does it mean to be equity-minded? Awareness of racial identity, claims to not see race, right? So there are many folks who felt like once President Obama was inaugurated, we entered into a post-racial society. And that is simply not true, right? To say that, for someone to say that they don't see race means that they don't see a person. If I say I don't see sex assigned at birth, right? That could be problematic because there are differences that need to be accounted for. And that's not on a value system, right? But there's simply differences that need to be accounted for people. And so for me to say I don't see race, it denigrates and dismisses the life experiences that people have had who have been racialized in this country. Uses disaggregated data to identify racialized patterns of outcomes, reflects on racial consequences of taking for granted practices, exercises agency to produce racial equity, views the classroom as a racialized space, and actively self-monitors interactions with students of color. So what this means is to be reflective, to be metacognitive, to think about the way that you think, and to be invested in justice-centered work. There is no justice-centered work without an awareness of self. Next slide, please. Epistemological disruption. So if epistemology is a new word for you, it just means the way that you know. Epistemologies are ways of knowing, how you ascertain knowledge, right? So epistemological disruptions. Institutions must see themselves as cultural texts. We have to rethink and evaluate curriculum, policies, and practices to take into account how institutional knowledge is constructed as individuals engage with and within the organization. And so in Minding the Obligation Gap, I wrote extensively about how community colleges should be positioned as disruptive technologies. And so we know, for those of us who have been in classroom spaces, we're all educators, right? The term disruptive has always had a negative connotation, but that connotation doesn't hold in Silicon Valley, right? Billions of dollars are being funneled into technology so that people can arrive at the next disruptive technology. Elon Musk with Tesla, right, introduced a disruptive technology. And so the way that a disruptive technology works is that it creates an atmosphere wherein people who are invested in that same line of work, if they don't adjust to that disruptive technology, they run the risk of becoming obsolete. And so what happens in community college spaces is that we oftentimes try to replicate the four-year institutions that we're purportedly feeders for, where we don't have to do that. We're not under the same auspices. We're not under the same strictures. We can actually challenge macro structural inequity because of our open access in ways that are altogether different from four-year colleges, but we have to be willing to take that on, and that's what this is speaking to. Next slide, please. So I think this is on you, Stephanie.
Okay, yes. So I just want to say thank you, Dr. Sims, for kind of setting that foundation for the conversation about we can have about a syllabus. And so when we talked about the last slide, it's the curriculum is where the faculty members really have a lot of their purview and their opportunity to do that disruption. I've heard a faculty member say, you know, we're not trying to fix things, we're trying to dismantle them. Because what we're doing is we can't tweak systems that are structurally inequitable. So it's really an opportunity to take that moment to do that inquiry, to do that self-reflection, and really dismantle these processes that we're working on. And one of the first opportunities we have to do that is in our syllabus. Because again, that is the first thing that we interact with the student with, right? It sets the tone of our entire conversation and our entire semester with our students. So it's really important to actually take the opportunity to read your syllabus critically. And there's lots of different tools. We mentioned the Q, the Center for Urban Education tools about equity-minded competence. They have syllabus reviews. They have all kinds of different tools that you can do to read your syllabus with a critical eye as we go forward on that. So think about the syllabus as your kind of introduction to the students. What do students care most about when they read the syllabus, right? Oftentimes, we traditionally take the syllabus, and the syllabus is the contract. Like it's what we are, you know, what we promise the students, right, and what they have to do. And the language in those syllabus is very contractual, right? It doesn't show that we want them to succeed, right? It doesn't show that we are partners with them in education. It doesn't show that we see them as part of the process as individual students. It's part of a contract, right? And most of us got syllabus from somebody else, kind of copied it, and we've tweaked it for years and years and years. And what I realized at the end of last semester or last spring was that I tweaked my syllabus for 10 years straight, right? And I started tweaking it again and realized I am fixing, not dismantling my processes. And so I actually started from scratch, and I like tossed everything out, and I said, okay, what should be in my syllabus? What do I want to reflect to students in my syllabus? How do you effectively do your course expectations and the expectations that your students are part of the process and that you want them to succeed? How can you think critically about your syllabus and look at it from different lenses? Do your things perpetuate discrimination and racial discussions in this? Are they built into your syllabus? It may be unintentional, but if you don't take the opportunity to actually reflect critically on it, you're just perpetuating that. And then how can you respond to the lived experiences of students of color in your curriculum, right? This is an essential part of not only just the syllabus, but it also should be reflected in your curriculum, in that we want to make sure the lives of all of our students are reflected in our curriculum. And it doesn't matter what subject it is. We've had discussions like, well, this is mostly about the social sciences, right? They're the ones who are going to be doing that. No, it's everywhere. If you read math questions and you look at the math questions and they say that women make, you know, less money than men, or, you know, this person, you know, different races make it. We looked at some of the questions in math and they are biased in racism. How can the examples that you do in any of your programs in nursing talk about the specific health concerns and specific areas of different racial groups? In, you know, administration of justice or in criminology, make sure you address those different things. Even in industry and manufacturing, how can we make sure we bring in the real lives of our students as part of the process? And the other thing is that we may want to look at your syllabus for asset-minded language, right? Our traditional syllabuses are very deficit-minded. Like, you will be kicked out if you do this, right? How can we switch that language so it's asset-minded language? Somebody the other day said, you know, in my syllabus about plagiarism, you know, I say if you have problems and you don't know what you're doing, come and talk to me. And if I see this, I will talk to you first before I take any action. And that's a very much asset-minded view of your syllabus, as opposed to like, if you do this, I'm going to kick you out. I'm going to send you to the dean of students, right? That's a different process of welcoming students into the system. And the other option is to ask your students to look at your syllabi, right? Have them look at it, have them tell you what it says to them and how it impacts them. So our students are our greatest resource for how students are feeling about different things. They can be your partners. And in some areas, people do liquid syllabuses where they actually introduce the syllabus to their students and have them build in things for each one of their courses that's relevant to them within the syllabus. And those are really great opportunities to bring students into the conversation. All right. Anything, Dr. Sims, did you have anything on that?
Just real quick. Yeah, so syllabus is a contract, right? So when I went to Berkeley, I had conversations with whomever was grading me, and I said, listen, if I do everything on the syllabus, I'm expecting an A in this course, right? And so I was trying to make sure that they understood the contractual nature of the syllabi. And then another thing, speaking about plagiarism, we've been talking about this at CSM, and so I've been helping folks with their language. And so some of the things that we do with regard to plagiarism, we have a conversation. There are certain things, right? There's certain levels of presumed innocence that some people get over other people, right? And so we want to be consciously aware of that, so we make that clear in the forefront. And then one more thing is we also add language. Some folks, not everyone, add language that is much more, to Stephanie's point, much more inclusive, right? So there are certain traps that previous students have fallen into. We want to make sure that you don't fall into those traps. We know you're here to do your best work. So here are how you avoid these traps. Right. And so we have the conversation. So it puts the onus back on the institution and the policies that animate the institution, and it is no longer pointed in the direction of the students.
I muted myself, sorry. So when we're doing a syllabus analysis, it's really good to do this as a process. And I will say I started my syllabus in May, and I have tweaked it all the way through. This is like a never-ending process on the syllabi. I got a kind of version and I'm like, oh, this is really great. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I read it over again. And I'm like, I forgot to add an inclusivity statement. And I forgot to link things to the basic aid that we have, or the food pantry and things like that. So my syllabus is an ongoing process. And so this process is not static. It's continually ongoing as part of the inquiry and self-reflection portion of equity work. So when you're doing your syllabus analysis, it's a good idea to look at and make observations of the course, capturing what you see and don't see in the syllabus. What can potentially hinder or facilitate success of students? And so critically read through your syllabus to see where there may be things that are harmful to students, or things that you could add in that would be beneficial for students. It's a good idea to think as a student when you're reading through it, right? How my student might read this, interpret it, and what to include and not to include. And this again is where if you bring the students in as part of this process, they can be part of the solution. And then base your observations and interpretations on constructive changes, like you wanting to move forward on this positivity view of this. So since we have time, we're just going to take a few moments and ask you guys in the chat to think about what can you do, or what have you done as part of your syllabus review, and what have you added to your syllabus or subtracted from your syllabus that has made it more equitable and more equity minded and more asset minded as a process. So we're going to take just a second and let you guys type that in. Yes, so Carl's talking about consult with their colleagues. Equity statements in the syllabus are great. A welcome message, that's fantastic. And part of the equity review and of your syllabus is an opportunity for self-reflection. and how you're going to be putting forward your values of equity and your values of what the class is going to be about. Oh, people are still typing. There you go. Yes, incorporating assignments on social justice. That's fantastic. Oh, as a part of your accounting class, that's great. Again, those real world applications are really exciting as part of the process. Yes. Open policies, that's fantastic. I will say what we've learned, especially through this pandemic, is that students' lives don't stop when they're in the classroom, right? Things are happening to our students all the time. And the more flexible we can be in our processes and our syllabi and the processes, the more opportunities we have for our students to succeed. So I just want to kind of bring that up to put to that. Yeah. 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 And it's really important for students to feel like they're connected to you personally. I have a colleague who puts in a personal statement at the beginning of her thing saying, you know what, this is me. I was a community college student. You know, I struggled, but I made it through. We can talk about it. You know, come and talk to me about things. Encouraging them to contact them. Encourage them to come to office hours. Setting up systems by which they can contact each other was really important. All right. So one of the examples that we have here is an inclusivity statement that a faculty member put forward here. That they say that they're going to put their own values in their syllabus and say that the values that guide this course are concept to the idea of family, of familias, right? And so they put forward in their syllabus that we will have mutual respect with each other. We will have shared responsibility. We have the opportunities to share meaningful experiences with each other. We want you to bring up your own personal experiences and how your knowledge and motivation and your efforts support your learning. We're going to do effective communication, and we're going to be supportive, comfortable, honest, and committed. And we're going to have some fun. And so this really sets up an opportunity for students to realize, you know what, you're going to be open to my conversations. You want me to participate. You want me to be part of this class. You're going to communicate with me and I can communicate with you, and you're going to respect me just as I'm going to respect you. And so really sets the tone for a classroom that is much more open and much more reflective of the values of our students. And the part of this is the idea of cultural humility, right? That each of us is taking this lifelong journey of equity and cultural humility, to increase our own self-awareness of our own biases and perceptions, to engage in a lifelong reflection process. And this process of creating curriculum, creating syllabi and things like that does take a lot of self-reflection. And it does take time. And it does take iterations, multiple things of inquiry. So we want to set it up so that students have the opportunity to learn from each other as part of the classroom and not just from the faculty member themselves, right? We want it to be an interactive process. We want to understand where they are and embrace the learning about each other with a reflective lens, right? We want our courses to address real world problems that are faced by our students, right? So the examples that we put forward, the information that we put forward should reflect the community in which we live, right? I heard once that we should be ethnographers of our communities, right? So that we understand what our community and our students are going through. And the challenges of the inequities along the lines of race, gender, and class, bring those forward as conversations and make sure you have the examples of those related and positive examples of your communities in your systems. All right. And then Dr. Sims, you're back up.
All right. And so I just, there's a couple points that I wanted to highlight. So the reality is you can't be on the fence, right? So we're having these conversations now about ethnic studies as a requirement at the community college level, right? Ethnic studies requirement because some CSUs are doing that. And I want to be clear that if we don't have an ethnic studies requirement, we are still ensconced within a system wherein we are going through an ethnic studies curriculum. It's just that those ethnic studies are geared towards a kind of hegemonic Europocentric way of knowing. You understand? So there's no middle ground. It's not, if we don't do ethnic studies, then we are necessarily elevating and lifting up Eurocentrism while simultaneously denigrating non-Eurocentrism. You know, so there's no middle ground. Everything that we do positively impacts some of the students we serve and negatively impacts other students. That is not something that is easy to change. But the problem is, if what we're doing always negatively impacts certain groups of students, then we need to figure out why that is. And so that's part of what this conversation is. And I can't make this point enough. We can't sit on the fence, right? We know that the previous president was really invested in building a fence, right? And that fence is incredibly problematic for a lot of reasons. And if we're sitting on the fence, then what are we doing? We're fortifying the weight of the fence, so it's that much more difficult to deconstruct and move. We have to get off the fence. We either need to get out of the way completely, or we need to do the work of deconstructing it. And so my argument, Stephanie's argument, is that we need to do the work of deconstructing it, because if you're not, you're just in the way. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about the term anti-racism some. And so anti-racism, to be anti-racist, and I just want to be clear, although his work is invaluable, Ibram Kendi didn't create that work, right? This work goes as far back as Harriet Tubman was doing anti-racist work, right? W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, these people were doing anti-racist work, right? There were people who fought against enslavement that were doing anti-racist work. Sitting Bull was doing anti-racist work. So these things are not new. It didn't just come around 2016 with Ibram Kendi's book. And so I want to be clear that to be anti-racist, there's an analog between being anti-racist and getting off the fence. To be non-racist is to be on the fence. To be anti-racist is to get off the fence and turn around and figure out how to deconstruct the fence. In the book, one of the book recommendations, and I don't really like doing this, but I felt like it was pertinent to this conversation. I recommended one of my books. And in that book, I talked about something called critical reality pedagogy. And so critical pedagogy is the kind of positionality that education is and always has been inherently political. There's no neutrality. Even in STEM education, there's no neutrality within education because it's taught by people and there's a very particular kind of lens in which people are teaching. So if you look at STEM education in this country, by and large, STEM education in this country is kind of birthed out of a kind of militaristic aesthetic, right? We want students to be able to, especially students of color, when we talk about putting STEM in places where it hasn't been, we want them to be able to be in position to build bigger, faster, smarter bombs to kill more people, more poor people worldwide. That's the reality, right? So the people that fund STEM education are like Northrop Grumman, places like that, right? Places who are invested in the destruction of humanity. And so anyway, irrespective of where you sit on that, I mean, I'm sharing this to say that it's important to understand that there is no middle ground. There is no liminal space. You're either working for anti-oppression and anti-racism, or you are, perhaps non-consciously, you are still feeding a monster that is seeking to consume disproportionately impacted students forever, right? And so we have to do something about it. So again, this is a call in, not a call out. We're inviting you in. And I know that many of you are already doing this work, right? I'm not trying to act like we thought of this ourselves and you don't know what's going on, but I just want to encourage folks who are on the fence, who are not that clear. Now is the time. 2021 is the time to get in the fight. If we look at what Regina Stanback Strauss said, it's time to enter into this work. And so I just wanted to implore folks, and it may not be needed. I don't know y'all that well. I'll be honest. You may be doing far more than I am already. And if you are, keep doing it and help bring other people into the conversation. And so equity-centered lesson plan. So I'm going to need to go to this link right here, but I can't do it. Are you able to do that, Stephanie? And so we'll and I appreciate you all sharing some of the things that you're doing. And I hope folks are taking notes, right? Because this is how you build capacity. This is how you build solidarity. I want to be clear. Solidarity comes through doing the work. You don't have to arrive at solidarity first. It comes through doing the work, doing justice work. If you can't open it, I can just share it with people. I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory. You're on mute too, I believe. So this is something that I used in a program many, many years ago. And so we'll just go over this real quick and then share it with you all so you can dig in. And if you have questions, I'll put my personal email here. If you have questions, you can just reach out to me directly, and I'll do my very best to walk you through anything that comes up. So the goal, you talk about your goal, right? How will students be encouraged, empowered, and equipped to not only gain new knowledge, but also to use their knowledge for positive, justice-centered change, right? That's a different focus. It's not just about whether or not they have some content level mastery. It's about whether or not that content level mastery lends itself to practical application for justice, right? For example, students are able to connect graphs. So this is a brilliant statistics professor at one of our sister colleges. This is his lesson plan. But this was many moons ago. He probably would iterate on it now. I think it's probably 6, 7 years old. Adjustments to ensure equity. How will this lesson better equip students to understand the need for inroads to justice? And so these are the types of conversations that you want to consider as you construct your lesson, right? This lesson will incorporate the use of multiple teaching strategies, right? Will it be agency inciting? That's what we want. We want to incite agency for our students. We want them to see themselves not just as people who are there to learn, akin to a banking model of education, but we want them to see themselves as co-producers and co-constructors of meaning and knowledge in our class, right? Because we're all learning together. So how are scholars, students, being equipped to exercise and develop agency in this participatory collective meaning-making process, right? Are you doing all the talking, right? Like this, right? It's hard for me to be saying this because it seems contradictory, right? But that's the way that these types of conversations are set up. And then I'll just go through a few more things, and again, we'll share it. This is the core of the lesson plan, the learning activities. What will take place during the lesson, and how will it incorporate the theoretical frame, SMASH Prep, that's my former program, is impelled by critical reality pedagogy. So critical reality pedagogy, I started to talk about that. That's a term that I created in my dissertation work and later in the STEM, revolutionary STEM education. So critical pedagogy takes the first position that education is always political. Reality pedagogy was offered by Professor Christopher Emden in his book, For White Folks That Teach in the Hood, and the rest of y'all too. I highly recommend that book. It's a bestseller. Christopher Emden is brilliant. He's a STEM educator. And so he identified the 5 components of reality pedagogy, which is co-generative dialogues. That means some of you already spoke to this in the comments. Working with students, right, to co-construct a syllabus would be co-generative dialogue, co-teaching, cosmopolitanism, where you introduce aspects of students' real life into your classroom. Because part of the problem for Black and brown students is that they're often asked to check their culture of the door of the classroom in order to be viewed as students who are full of promise and potential. And that's a problem. We need to get away from that. He talked about content and context, right? And so I married those two terms. And critical reality pedagogy is best explained in this way. If you think about the metaphor for critical thinking, which is to think outside the box, critical reality pedagogy encourages, empowers, and equips students to not only think outside the box, but to turn around, look at the box's positionality, determine who is being negatively impacted so that they can deconstruct and, if necessary, reconstruct the box so that it's commensurate with justice. That's what critical reality pedagogy does. So it's not you doing for your students, it's you doing alongside your students. All right. And so then it talks about the motivation or the hook for the lesson, strategies you will use to link prior knowledge and personal experience. Scaffolding is incredibly important. Assessment, performance levels, materials, and so then the reflection. And so I would encourage you not to do this for every single lesson, but to get into this practice. And then I'm okay with folks tweaking as you go along, because what happens is, I'll tell you this story real quick. I used to be really, really into old cars. I don't know if any of my automotive folks are here. I had a 67 Firebird, and I used to dump so much money into it. Now it's fairly handy. I can fix a lot of things myself. And that's back when you could work on cars because they weren't computerized. And so, but I always had this problem with smoking, and I couldn't determine the source of the smoke. It was incredibly difficult for me. I didn't have the internet back then, so I couldn't just look up a how-to video. I had a buddy come over, and within 5 minutes, it took me months, I couldn't figure it out. Within 5 minutes, he determined where the smoke was coming from. He did that because he's a really bright person, but he did that because he was a mechanic. He was trained to identify those types of issues. So the more you practice, the more your frame changes, and it's easier for you to recognize in doing this type of work wherein you are creating opportunities for students to develop agency. So I would say get into practice. And again, if you get tripped up, if you want to have a conversation about one of these aspects, please feel free to reach out to me. But you can also tweak this to fit your context as well. And so I'll stop with that And again, we're going to share this with folks so you can dig into it. You're on mute.
Sorry, getting us back to the PowerPoint. Just 1 second. There we go. Okay.
All right. And so now I'll talk a little bit about the impact grid. So for me, the impact grid, so y'all familiar with growth mindset? I know that took community colleges by storm, right? Growth mindset is defined kind of in contradistinction to a fixed mindset, where we know that struggle is necessary in order to, right? When you struggle, that's when you actually learn, right? When you go through different kind of cognitive thresholds, that's where learning takes place. If you don't challenge yourself, then you will remain static. And then there's anti-racism. But I feel like in my work, right, I get not only in my 9 to 5, but I get brought in as a consultant and as a speaker, and I talk to folks, and people are really excited to do work that is anti-racist, that is justice advancing. They just don't know where to start. And so I meet so many people who are well-intentioned, but they just don't know where to start. I wanted to create a starting point, a launching point for folks. And so if you could go to sample 1 on the tab on the bottom. See that? Oh, yeah, there you go. Yep. And so we'll talk a little bit about what this is. So the impact grid, impact stands for innovative, mindful, purposeful, anti-racist, caring, and transformative. And so this is an equity audit tool, right? So I created this prior to the chancellor's, the state chancellor's kind of mandate, but it fits nicely within that. And so we're using this for our educational master plan at CSN. We're using this for guided pathways. We're using it for our equity work. There are individual professors who are using it and have invited students to use it in their class to audit their syllabi, for example, and some of the policies. Because the argument behind this is that people make policies. Policies determine how people are treated, right? And so we need to be very intentional about that. So I'll go a little bit over these. So what does it mean to be innovative? In this particular context, innovative means that it is moving us away from inequity. I don't care that it's new, right? So normally innovation connotes something that's new. The issue is not whether it's new. The issue is whether it or not it changes our paradigm so that we're moving away from macro-structural inequity, right? Mm-hmm. Is it mindful? Are we paying attention to who's being positively impacted and who's being negatively impacted? Is it purposeful, right? Oh yeah, if you could roll over, so there's a little bit, so go to purposeful and then another box will come up, right? It's purposeful if it can be practically accomplished while positively impacting marginalized groups. Then is it anti-racist? How does it work to ultimately change policies, practices, procedures predicated on anti-Black and other forms of racism? And so when you go over these boxes, and I'll make these available for folks that are interested, you just have to email me. Caring, how will marginalized groups see that we care? It's caring if it's evident to students that effort was made to care for their differential considerations and situations. Put simply, they should be able to see the love. Is it transformative? How is it working towards a more equitable campus culture? And so if we scroll up to the top one more time, sorry to put you through all this. I was working with some friends from sister colleges, and they were looking at credit by examination and credit for prior learning, right? So I can read these comments here. It says credit by examination is not innovative because it forces and values hegemonic Eurocentric epistemologies. This focus on Eurocentrism or Eurocentric ways of knowing on what is considered to be standardized, it's all right, and canonical is predicated on and the support of a value gap that not only privileges whiteness, but also Eurocentric cultural norms at the expense of all. There's a lot of Eurocentric here, epistemology. Yeah. Basically what it's saying is that credit by examination, people who do better by credit by examination are people who have had better training more often than not, right? And that's directly informed by your socioeconomic status. And socioeconomic status and race in this country are intractably tied together, right? But credit for prior learning is innovative in that it works to disrupt institutionalized inequity by mitigating the advantages that students that come from better resource schools, primarily because they come from homes with higher socioeconomic statuses, have vis-a-vis poor ethno-racially minoritized students of color. So we were looking at these two, only for me, so I wrote this, only one of them was actually innovative. Only one was mindful. So there's a scoring system. So if you look up here, and you probably can't see it that well, the first symbol is a heart with a fist intertwined, represents solidarity. That means that this policy, as it is written, currently addresses inequities. Then there's the heart. The heart means that it has the potential to, but something is missing. And then the last one is the institution. That means that it fails to address inequities and it is interested in just maintaining the status quo, right? And so the way that this works, there are 3 steps to this process. That's why you see step 1. So what would happen if you wanted to take this on? You would get with a group of folks, could be cross-representational, could be within your department or division, and you would identify the policies or practices that you want to take a look at. And so each person would fill out this sheet individually. And then you would get together as a group and determine what it is that you want to take up in your inquiry group. The second stage is a deeper dive. The second stage is once you've decided the policies that you want to take up, right? What does the data say? What is it? And there may not be data. You got to go out, honey. I'm sorry, here come my kids. There may not be data that you can pull from. So what you would have to do is create metrics wherein you could arrive at that data yourself. Sorry, I'm being overrun by toddlers. Close the door, honey. Close the door. My guys are little. They're 11, 8, 6, 4, and 20 months. And so anyway, so getting back to this, that's the second step. The third step is individual. You just reflect on how you contributed to the process. So we're not going to get into the second step yet because folks are only going to be at the first step. And so some of our sister colleges are using this. Other colleges that I work with, they're using it. I highly recommend that you take a stab at it. We've got a lot of work. I can show some examples from some of the guided pathways work that is taking place. So one of these that's fairly straightforward, I'll just go through real quick to give another example, is drop-in hours. And so this was more of an issue perhaps when we were in person, but it's still an issue. So at CSM, and I'm sure that many of your colleges are like this, during the first 2 weeks of instruction, there are no appointments for counseling. There's only drop-in hours, right? And so ostensibly, that's a good policy because it casts a wide net. But in reality, low-income students, poor students have to work while they're in school. Because it's drop-in and you don't have the availability of appointments, some students have to wait 3 to 5 hours in order to be seen. If you work a job for an hourly wage, you can't miss out on those hours, right? Because you need that money to survive, and you may not be able to get. So I don't know how familiar folks are with the College of San Mateo. There's nowhere in our city, unless you work on campus, where you can leave your job, get in your car, if you have a car, get to our college, find a parking space, and see a counselor within a 30-minute allotted lunch. It just doesn't happen. And so what happens for students who have to work while they go to school, some of them are starting 2 weeks behind because you have to see a counselor to get your classes, right? Especially for new students. And for some students, that's enough to dissuade them from going further. And so, again, that's a policy that seems like it's good because it casts a wide net, but there's a certain amount of privilege. I spoke to some students on the 3rd floor, and they said that they've been waiting for 5 hours. There's a certain amount of privilege that's necessary to be able to wait and not be paid for 5 hours to see a counselor to get your classes, right? And so we began to look at that. And now we're figuring out ways to do something about that. As a college, we took this up. There's a small group of the counseling faculty that want to take a look at this, and that's what's going on. We also talked about our students' grievance process, just to offer another example. When we look through this, is our current grievance process innovative? It's not, right? Now, we know that it needs to be balanced. We don't want faculty to be falsely accused, but we also want students to be in a position where they could share and maintain some level of anonymity, because you saw our syllabus statement. Many times when there are issues, students come to me and we have conversations. These are overwhelmingly students of color, and they want to talk to me, but they don't want to do anything else because they don't want to run the risk of being penalized for reporting behavior that they feel to be untoward, right? And so they just basically have to swallow it because they're in the class and they want to make sure they get a good grade so they can go further, right? So we're thinking about, well, what if there's a way that you can have an anonymous system where it doesn't count at the same level. It's not the same level of escalation as an official, right, a grievance process where students have to put their name on it, but it provides a way for there to be conversations with the faculty so they're aware, but they don't know who the student is, right? So those are some of the things that we're starting to revisit, because what we realize, right, is that we do a lot of things, all of us, every single one of us, myself included, Stephanie included, we do a lot of things in our job just because they've always been done that way, right? And we haven't stopped to question some of those things. And so this is a way to begin to question some of those quotidian kind of perfunctory things that we do without even thinking twice about it. Because again, everything that we do positively impacts some of our students and negatively impacts others. There is no liminal space. All right, so that's step one. If you want to take a look at it, if you want the tool, email me and I'll respond to you with the link so that you could start to play around with it.
Okay, let me get that back here.
All right, so then real quick, so I talked about a bridge. And so there's anti-racism on the one hand, there's growth mindset on the other hand, and I feel like the impact grid is what bridges the two, right? So growth mindset is based on Carol Dweck's work, Dr. Carol Dweck's work, but I feel like Joe Bowler really extended that. Professor Joe Bowler is a professor in learning sciences at Stanford, and so she talked about her book Limitless Mind. I recommend that book as well. She used the example of these middle-aged men in London. They wanted to be London black cab drivers, right? So that's not their ethno-racial identity. The company is called Black Cab. It's the most prestigious cab company in London. And so in order to be a black cab driver, you have to take this test. It's called the knowledge, and you have to memorize over 128,000 streets and avenues, right? So on average, it takes these guys 4 years to study for this test, and it takes 12 attempts before they actually succeed, right? But once they get there, they're set. And so what they found to be the case in these middle-aged men is that while they were studying for this test, their hippocampus actually grew, right? Through MRI technology, it grew because that was the area associated with spatial recognition. So it grew. And so what that means is that they were creating new neural pathways and new synaptic connections, right? So I'm saying this to say what? We can have an anti-racist growth mindset. You don't have to be a critical race scholar, right? You just have to be willing to do the work and understand that you will struggle, but that's okay. Struggling is part of learning. It actually creates a pathway for learning because you can make new neural pathways so that you can better understand how to do the work. And tying back to the example of my friend who was a mechanic, right? As you do the work, what will happen is that your framework will change. So it will become easier for you to recognize racialized inequities in the work that you do. That's what an anti-racist growth mindset is. And so real quick, I want people to just rank themselves in the chat, right? And we're all in different places and we're all on a journey. And so don't, only if you feel comfortable, but where do you fall in advancing equity on your campus, right? I'm interested. I would like to learn more about how to do equity advancing work. That's a 1. So if that's where you are, just put a 1 in the chat. I'm starting to get it. I realize how important my role is in this work. That's a 2. So put that in the chat. And 3, I know how to do this. I've been working towards equity on several fronts and I've had some success. Right, and half points are okay. I see Christina did that. That's all right. I feel like I'm at a half point too. That's awesome. This is awesome to see all the 2s. I think I'm like a 2.5. I'm getting there. And so y'all remember this. We're going to go to the next slide. All right, so my argument is this, right? I'm not offering a silver bullet, but what I'm saying is that if you do the work of the impact grid, for example, because this is a starting point, if you continue to look at your policies, practices, procedures, and pedagogies through this frame, you will be able to identify, like my mechanic friend, the source of problems that had been previously very difficult for you to identify. And so I think that this is the progression, right? So if you're a 1, you're an equity learner, and that's totally okay. You're working to better understand both the importance of equity work and how to begin questioning previously unquestioned, racialized, gendered, classicist worldviews. That's totally fine. You don't want to stay there, though, because to stay there is analogous to sitting on the fence, right? And you've just made yourself an obstacle for actual justice work. So you got to get off the fence and you have to push towards being an equity advocate, which is working towards a deeper understanding of anti-racism and equity. And it means you're ready to take action. And you've already begun stepping outside of your comfort zone, because one of the things that limit people in doing this work is the discomfort with the idea of being uncomfortable. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable, right? That's what growth mindset argues for. That's what anti-racist growth mindset argues for. And the ultimate goal is to be applied equity practitioners. One thing to know these things is another thing to put them into practice, right? Or praxis, because the term praxis, Praxis, is theory plus practice, right? So we want to have an equitable praxis. And so in order to be an applied equity practitioner, right? That means you're committed to and conversant in the praxis of anti-racism and equity-centered principles, and you're able to demonstrate the ability to apply these principles in order to address and redress social injustice. It means that you have a grasp of the whole and can zero in on the root of the problem. So a lot of times in equity work, we fixate on symptoms like the achievement gap, right? That's a symptom of a much larger chronic disease, right? The chronic disease is racialized capitalism and white supremacy, right? And so we can do both. We can do triage, but we also have to figure out how to destroy the chronic disease as well, right? And so this can be, there's a simultaneity to this work. I would argue we have to do those things at the same time. And so again, wherever you are right now, even if you think you're a 4 or 5, we still can learn more. We still can do better. And so I think that, again, it's not magic. It requires work. It requires reflectivity and reflexivity. It requires metacognition. It requires a willingness and an actual love for justice. But if you're willing to embark on that journey, then I'm confident that you folks can get to the point where you feel confident calling yourself applied equity practitioners. Excuse me. We're talking too much. And so this is what it looks like. It's actually a Google sheet, and so you can just fill it in directly on the sheet, but this was just to give some context. Can we go to the next slide, please? Action is the antithesis of ambivalence, and solidarity is created through the work, right? If you're ambivalent, if you're apathetic with regard to these things, if you start doing some stuff, I assure you that will change. And that's what I had, and so I think now we pause for questions.
Yes, feel free to put questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll make sure you get called upon. I know probably people have lots of questions. There are some resources here as part of the process, so you can access the resources here that kind of relate to equity-minded syllabi and some of those other things, culture responsive teaching, lots of resources for you. And then if you need more information, we put our email addresses here. And I did post the PowerPoint in the chat. I'll do it one more time before we leave. If you have questions, you can always email us on the email. And then Mayra was supposed to be doing this presentation. She did a lot of the PowerPoint slides, and so I put her email address in here as well as we move forward. All right. So are there any questions that we can answer for you? The other option is you can email info@asccc.org, and that's the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges. And if we had information, we'd be happy to do that and send you information. Yes. And Dr. Sims, I think we all agree that you cannot talk too much, that, you know, that listening to you is amazing. Yes.
I'm going to need you to repeat that for my wife. Let me call her in here.
Yes. All right. Okay, I'm going to take us out of the screen share and do this. So if there's any questions, comments, everybody's ready to get their syllabus out and just review it with a critical lens.
And again, I don't say that lightly. I'm a resource. So if you have questions about any of the things that we discussed and you want to talk about it with colleagues, and I'm totally happy and available to have those conversations, because I know that I'll learn too. So just feel free to reach out.
Right. Okay. Yes, I put the PowerPoint in there. Okay, so there's a question about how do you move the college from equity learner or even advocate to applied practitioner?
So it's a process, right? It's a process. And so one of the things that we have to do is we have to have grace for people who are not quite there, right? And we also have to have grace for ourselves. And we have to understand that. So I've been at CSM almost 5 years now. And so what has happened is that there have been some atmospheric shifts, and I don't take full responsibility for that. There are already people doing brilliant things there. But one of the things that we started with is changing our vocabulary, right? Because words have power. And so if you don't already have one, I would get with some folks because it may be too arduous for one person to start to kind of define some of the terms that people use, right? So for us, it was hyper marginalized, right? So to be marginalized, you could be marginalized because you're a woman, right? You could be marginalized because you are Latina. But if you are a Latina who is poor, for whom English is not your first language, right? And you're the first in your family to go to college, when those different levels of marginalization coalesce, that's hyper marginalization, right? So what we did is we started to define key terms. Because a lot of times, and if you think about this, we know this to be true, the disagreements that we have with our colleagues oftentimes is around terminology, right? And so I think that if you could work towards, and this is not going to fix it all, but this is a step in the right direction. You work towards fixing the vocabulary, setting a glossary of key terms that is available to your college. Not everybody's going to take it up. But what has happened for us is that when we're talking about things, we don't have to disagree about what we're talking about at the same level because we're using common definitions, and those common definitions lends itself to a common understanding about some of the issues that we face. So that's one of the first things that I did when I got there. It was just to kind of not concretize, right? Because there's some malleability, right? Words change, word meanings change, but the idea that we are using a shared language and that allows us to enter into this work uh, in a spirit of solidarity. And so I think that's one of the things that you can start if you don't already have that.
And I'm going to put a link in the chat. The Chancellor's Office has a glossary of DEI terms that could be a good place to start. And you can always adapt them to your own institution and how you have those conversations, but it's a good grouping of conversation glossary. Yeah. Okay. There we go. I'll put that in the chat right there. All right. Any other questions for Dr. Sims or myself? Oops, I got a message here. Oh, yeah.
And then I will say just one more thing. I think that, I'm not charging for this, so it's not like a shameless plug. I feel like the impact grid has created opportunities for people to have a shared kind of vocabulary, right? Because now we're talking about innovation, not in the Catholic sense, right? The Catholic universal definition, but we're talking about it in a very specific way, right? Something is innovative if and only if it moves us away from inequity. And so in doing that work, what has happened is that people who erstwhile felt like they didn't have an entry point into this work are doing it, and they're developing an anti-racist growth mindset in the process. And so I would highly recommend, it doesn't have to be that tool, but a tool that you all can share. You just start where you are. It's like guerrilla warfare, right? You fight where you are. If you have a group of 4 or 5 folks who are interested in having these conversations. And so just to be clear, we're not doing this work in a vacuum. When we make these recommendations, when these folks make recommendations with regard to policies or practices using the impact grid, there's a process. We've identified a process. Ultimately, right, they'll have those conversations within their department and divisions, and then they're going to make presentations to IPC, right, which is our institutional planning committee. So we're going to run this all the way up. Because what I want to do, what the impact grid does, and I'll be honest, this was part of my selfish motivation for this, is that when you work with leadership, sometimes they make decisions and they can honestly say, right, and sometimes it's not honest, but they can say, well, I wasn't aware of the potential ramifications when I made this decision. But if we make clear recommendations and we talk about how this is going to disproportionately impact some students, right, then we take away that feigned ignorance. So now the conversation is different and the level of accountability is different. And so I recommend using this tool or a tool like it so that you can have these conversations and say, look, President, we let you know well ahead of time that if you did this, it was going to negatively impact Black students, and you did it anyway. So now we have to have a different level of conversation about what we can do about that.
Yeah. For some reason, the chat is not allowing me to post the PowerPoint again. So I'm going to try to see what's wrong with that. But what we'll do is we'll also make sure that they get it for the institution, for the organization, and they'll probably post it up on their website as well.
It works for me, just FYI.
Yeah. Oh wait, well here, let me try it one more time. So it should be putting it in there. It's a PowerPoint. It should be,
You have to click on it first.
you have to click on it and it should be able to download it. Okay, so I'm going to do that right now. Let me try to see if I can do it with a PowerPoint as well. Okay, there we go. Sending both of them. There we go. And so there's lots of resources and information in the PowerPoint. All right. We just have a few more minutes left, but is there any other questions people have? Actually, we're over time, but that's okay. Nothing came through on the main chat. Huh. Anybody who didn't get that, just at the back of, let me put my email address in, and that if you want a copy of the presentation, you could just email me if you couldn't get access to it, and I will email it to you. All right, and mine's the readthecollege.edu, and so just email me and I'll make sure you get a copy of it. All right. All right, well, thank you guys all for spending your morning with us and having this amazing conversation about culturally relevant curriculum and how this can apply for a CTE. I want to thank Dr. Sims for sharing all that great information with us. And I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your conference. All right, thank you guys all.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to save this.